There are very few passenger ships, let alone passenger ship companies, that can be identified as being beyond influential in their part of a nearly 200-year-long industry full of thousands of ships of various designs, backgrounds, sizes, and missions. In the present day, one company commands a presence above all the others when anything they make is brought into the world. Words and phrases to describe their products may include some of the following: bold, out of the box, unexpected, game-changing, revolutionary, and iconic. This company is Royal Caribbean International. Since their founding in 1968 and the introduction of their first ship 2 years later, virtually every lead ship in their new build classes have changed, transformed, or rewrote the rules in terms of both what a cruise ship could be and what it was able to do. That became more clear than ever before to both the general public and the cruise industry when their newest lead ship sailed into the Caribbean Sea for the very first time in January 2024. It was the nearly 249,000-ton Icon of the Seas. Icon was and is many things: the largest passenger ship ever constructed, a floating city, a resort-style amusement park, or maybe even a colorful monstrosity. But above all of those descriptors and ways to define her, she is first and foremost a once-in-a-generation ship, a rare honor for any passenger ship to have. Icon was a tremendous success for her owners right out of the gate, and in large part still is. Thankfully, she was not going to have to carry the burden of satisfying an unbelievable amount of demand by herself for the rest of her career. She is the first in a lineup of at least 5 ships of similar design, and the question on everyone's mind was this: was the magic and aura surrounding Icon a product of the moment? Or was this high level of demand going to continue onwards into the future sisters? That question would start to receive an answer starting back in August of 2025, when Icon's first sister began her career. This is the story of her beginnings, construction, and what she brings to the table in an ever-growing and competitive market. This is Star of the Seas, the second installment in the Icon class. When Star of the Seas officially started her career back in late August 2025, she became the largest passenger ship ever built. However, she does share the title with Icon, with both having a tonnage of 248,663. A vessel's gross tonnage, which is a measurement of its internal volume, determines the size and therefore rank on the biggest ship list. Although it should be noted that Star is 3 inches longer and 1 inch wider than Icon, being 1,196 feet 11 inches long and 159 feet 1 inch wide at the waterline. It is not Star's overall dimensions or ranking that makes her special though. She is a continuation of not only the major success the Icon class has so far received, but also the newest member in a family tree that includes some of the most influential and revolutionary passenger ships ever to sail. Understanding what Star and the Icon class in general brings to the industry necessitates us looking back at some of the ships that have come before that helped mold their conception. Royal Caribbean International is arguably the top mainstream cruise line at the present time, and that title was not achieved by accident. Since their founding in 1968, they have brought forth ships that, among other things, redefine the cruise ship as a concept. They have had 9 classes of new builds throughout their history, and every single one of at least their respective lead ships have brought forth something that changed the game for not only themselves, but for the industry as a whole. Leading up to Icon, these classes include Song of Norway, Song of America, Sovereign, Vision, Voyager, Radiance, Freedom, Oasis, and Quantum. Before briefly diving into what made each class special, it should be quickly mentioned as to why each one achieved what they did, and that comes from the company's mission and North Star. From the very beginning, even before the arrival of the leadership that truly transformed the company into what it is today, Royal Caribbean has had the goal of providing something that would break away from tradition in a big way, but not at all fronts. Their first series of ships, which comprised the Song of Norway class, were Song of Norway, Nordic Prince, and Sun Viking. At the time of their entry, the cruise industry was relatively infant and was largely made up of second-hand converted ocean liners, which were not well suited in this new role of running cruises in warmer markets. This was due to the fact that they were designed for a different mission altogether. The Song of Norway sisters were among the first purpose-built cruise ships ever made, and they were purposely designed for a warmer market. They featured numerous large windows in the public spaces, a wide-open lido deck with a large pool, and an observation lounge housed right at the aft of the funnel, offering near 360-degree views around the ships. These features alone shot away any one-to-one comparison with any former ocean liner operating in the same market. They also pioneered several other things individually, including itineraries. Nordic Prince, right off the bat, offered Miami's first regular 14-night itinerary, opening up a wealth of possibilities not seen previously in the Caribbean. Later in life, Sun Viking offered the company's first true international itineraries, opening up cruises to the Baltic region, Mediterranean, Norwegian fjords, and the Arctic. So popular were these new ships that both Song of Norway and Nordic Prince were lengthened by 85 feet not even a decade after they debuted to add additional capacity. But it was not enough, and so the next class of ship was born, though it only had one member. She was Song of America. Nearly double the size of the Song of Norway members, she brought forth relatively new design philosophies for the industry, which included having the majority of the cabins located forward. This was implemented so that they were as far away as possible from the loud engine machinery located aft. She also had 2 large pools on her lido deck and a full 360-degree viewing lounge surrounding her funnel. She became the first ship in the company to run cruises to Bermuda out of New York. Next came the Sovereign class, which included Sovereign, Monarch, and Majesty of the Seas. They were the first true megaships for the industry and were the result of a shift in thinking within the company to change the purpose of what their vessels' missions would be, to not just rival any type of cruise, but any type of vacation. They introduced the vertical atrium, which allowed for easier access around the ship, a focal point for passengers to orient themselves, and a dramatic entrance. This one feature alone reshaped cruise ship design philosophy forevermore. A lot of the signature Royal Caribbean venues still found on their ships today started with Sovereign, including the Windjammer Cafe, Schooner Bar, Gymnasium, Champagne Bar, health spa, dedicated spaces for children, and the casino. She was also the first Royal Caribbean ship to feature "of the seas" in the name, as well as the first not to be built in the Scandinavian region, being built instead in Saint-Nazaire, France. Sovereign was, in some ways, the birth of the Royal Caribbean of today, in terms of what kind of ships they build, how they are designed, and what their overall mission is. Richard Fain, longtime CEO of Royal Caribbean Group, describes this as follows. The success of Sovereign of the Seas, and our other earlier ships, had surpassed even our most ambitious expectations. But it wasn't enough. Our North Star had always been twofold: to become a preeminent force in the broader vacation market, and to deliver the best vacation anywhere, driven by exceptional service, innovation, and quality. Innovation in ship design was essential to that vision. The best way to understand how that innovation came to life is through the ships themselves, and the purposeful decisions that shaped them. With a well-established base in the Caribbean, especially with the Sovereign sisters, Royal Caribbean decided to really expand their international market after ships like Sun Viking helped demonstrate their viability. This resulted in their most ambitious class yet. Project Vision, as it was first coined, would be made up of 6 ships with the goal of being versatile. As a result, they became early pioneers in the all-climate cruise ship. Until now, cruise ships were largely either converted ocean liners or were purpose-built warm market ships. The 6 members of the resulting Vision class included Legend, Splendor, Grandeur, Enchantment, Rhapsody, and Vision of the Seas. Surrounding the majority of their public rooms are 2 acres of glass, allowing the guests to have views to the outside from practically anywhere inside the ship, especially in the main dining room. So great was the volume of natural light being let in that they were known as the Ships of Light. They also had solariums, which is, at their most basic, an enclosed pool area completely surrounded by glass. They even had a retracting roof in the solarium if the weather was pleasant outdoors. They were the first class in Royal Caribbean, and among the first industry-wide, to be purposely built with balcony rooms. They were also the first Royal Caribbean ships to be powered by a diesel-electric propulsion system, allowing for better weight and longitudinal balance. This type of system was also used to enable the ships to be fast, able to achieve an average speed of 24 knots, the fastest seen in a quarter of a century. Legend was the first cruise ship to have a mini-golf course, which could be utilized if the solarium's roof was closed. Lastly, but certainly not least, Grandeur was the first cruise ship to utilize a relatively new technology called dynamic propulsion. By utilizing satellite, wind, and sea current data, the ship's propulsion system would be activated or even deactivated in order to keep the vessel within a few feet of a designated location. No longer was required to anchor offshore while using tender operations. The Vision lineup was not even completed when Royal Caribbean began dreaming about their next series of megaships. The members of the Voyager class, Voyager, Explorer, Adventure, Navigator, and Mariner of the Seas, were revolutionary for the market. They marked Royal Caribbean's, and in some ways the cruise industry's, first true all-out attempt to attract the non-cruiser. They implemented so many features not even dared thought of for the industry. These included the first rock wall, full-size basketball court, and ice skating rink put to sea. Another revolutionary feature was the horizontal atrium known as the Royal Promenade, which is placed between 2 vertical atriums and serves as essentially a city street, housing a number of types of venues flanking either side. The Voyager class was first known as Project Eagle, and they were intended to carry Royal Caribbean into not only the new millennium, but into a new realm, and they achieved that with ease. 3 of the sisters achieved the title of being the largest ever built when they debuted. The difference in tonnage from the holder before Voyager Princess Cruises Grand Princess, was almost 30,000 tons. They were the first Royal Caribbean ships, as well as among the first in the industry, to have a new type of propeller known as the Azipod. Before, ships had largely utilized a fixed shaft design, which is a propeller connected to a long shaft into the hull. It would then use a rudder to help steer. Now, 2 of the 3 propellers were mounted on electric pods that could turn 360 degrees, allowing for unmatched maneuverability, especially while in port, and eliminating the need for rudders. Together with a new marketing campaign, Royal Caribbean and the Voyager ships went all in on attracting the non-cruiser, and it soon produced fruit. The days of believing that cruising was for the wealthy or retired, and not for multi-generational families or groups, was starting to fade away. Demand was high. So successful was the Voyager design and mission, that Royal Caribbean decided to do something they had not really done before: create a new class which largely was built off the previous. First known as Project Ultra Voyager, a new series of ships were designed to take the very popular Voyager design, stretch it by another 91 feet, and add even more revolutionary features. The resulting vessels, which included Freedom, Liberty, and Independence of the Seas, became a part of the Freedom class. They became the first ships in the industry to have cantilevered whirlpools, a flowrider surf simulator, a boxing ring, and a dedicated water complex for younger cruisers. Many Voyager favorites returned, but were often expanded or lengthened. This included the Lido deck, which offered 43% more pool space than Voyager, and by far the largest gymnasium ever put to sea. Upon her entry into service in 2006, Freedom instantly saw the highest number of bookings from families than any other ship. The multi-generational approach Royal Caribbean set out on was continuing to bear fruit, and in greater quantities. Upon their debuts, every sister was the largest passenger ship yet. A 4th member of the class was announced to be built in early 2008, but was ultimately never realized. Instead, attention was focused on another class we will get to shortly. Wedged between the Voyager and Freedom class is the Radiance class, and its 4 members: Radiance, Brilliance, Serenade, and Jewel of the Seas. Their mission was largely the same as the Vision class, that is to focus on the more scenic and harder to reach ports, and enable passengers to take in all of their surroundings easily and without compromise. To do this, Royal Caribbean implemented a new generation of all-climate ships. Each member has over 3 acres of glass surrounding the public spaces, including a giant window on one entire side of the vertical atrium. They were among the first cruise ships to use a gas turbine system to power the vessel. Although less fuel efficient, it was more environmentally friendly and was considerably quieter, producing less vibrations than traditional systems. The first decade of the 2000s saw Royal Caribbean producing ships at a rate not seen yet for the company, and it was largely focused on attracting the non-cruiser, as well as the multi-generational group. The Voyager and Freedom designs worked well, but in an ever-increasingly competitive market, they knew that continuing on this design wasn't going to be enough. And so, starting as early as 2004, they embarked on a new class altogether, one that would completely shatter all expectations and make even those not interested in cruise ships in any capacity stare in amazement. The endeavor was coined Project Genesis. In 2009, a new breed of cruise ship was introduced to the world, and it came in the form of Oasis of the Seas, the first in the Oasis class. Where do you even begin when talking about this series of ships? Well, to start, Oasis, Allure, Harmony, Symphony, Wonder, and Utopia of the Seas introduced a myriad of new features and concepts to the industry, including the first park with live plants, carousel, zip line, and aqua theater at sea. At over 225,000 tons each, They were by far and away the largest passenger ships ever, smashing the previous record held by both Liberty and Independence of the Seas, whose tonnages were 155,889. What could be considered their best overall contribution is what is called the neighborhood concept. Because of the sheer size of the ships, and the amount of people that could possibly be on board, it was absolutely essential that the venues and layout was not a confused mess and would help spread the population out. To do this, the ships were divided into at least 7 distinct areas, with each area having its own theme, feel, and atmosphere. 2 of the best examples of this include Central Park and the Boardwalk. Each area has their own types of dining, entertainment, and lounging opportunities. Although simple, this concept was never utilized in this way, and it worked brilliantly. So well, in fact, that, with a few exceptions, passengers could hardly tell they were sharing a ship with almost 7,000 other people. What is even more hard to wrap your mind around is that, almost 2 decades after Oasis first debuted, the class is still growing, with the latest member, Utopia, starting her career in July 2024, and a yet unnamed 7th member currently under construction and due to enter service in 2028. That leaves just one class left to discuss, and it is the Quantum class. First announced as Project Sunshine in 2011, the resulting 5 members, Quantum, Anthem, Ovation, Spectrum, and Odyssey of the Seas, were, once again, largely intended to evolutionize the all-climate ship concept, but it would do so in a far bigger and better way. Thanks to their large size, with all being just under 170,000 tons in displacement, they were able to implement features that could only be installed on bigger ships, including the first true observation pod, escape room, bumper cars, and skydiving simulator at sea. From the beginning, they were known as the Smart Ships, implementing a raft of new technologies around various areas throughout, ranging from robotic bartenders to a number of electronic charging points inside the cabins. Quantum was the first cruise ship to implement and put into action what is known as an air lubrication system, which is a system that produces a large number of tiny air bubbles beneath the hull, which creates a so-called layer of air. This allows for better fuel efficiency and less water resistance against the hull. Over the course of 54 years, and only counting the ships we have so far covered, Royal Caribbean launched 36 ships. Many of those ships implemented several items that forever transformed the cruise ship as a concept, with many of those features being implemented with the idea of attracting non-cruisers, multi-generational families or groups, and to provide not just a cruise unlike any other, but a vacation unlike any other. When other cruise lines largely weren't interested in going beyond sub-1,000 passenger vessels, Royal Caribbean wasn't afraid to create the largest cruise ship ever when the design called for it. When other lines and shipyards were hesitant about installing large open rooms inside of ships, Royal Caribbean answered by installing a grand 5-story atrium or 4-story horizontal atrium longer than a football field. When cruise lines and critics screamed that ships were getting too big and too crowded, Royal Caribbean said, "Let's break that notion and create true cities at sea across multiple different classes." It becomes clear that with the mindset of never being satisfied and working exceptionally hard to push the boundaries of what's possible, even when everyone is doubting, that something truly incredible can be created that causes the bar of what's possible with a cruise ship to jump 10 levels up. Until recently, the Oasis class was the clearest example of this. Are they for everyone? No. Do they have their faults and limitations? Absolutely. However, all ships have these items, and the positives found in that class alone far outweigh the negatives for most. They were way ahead of their time as well. It took roughly 10 years for a rival company to even begin to touch what Oasis and Allure first implemented. And now, almost 20 years later, it has become an undeniable fact that ships of that size and everything they offer are absolutely necessary in any mainstream fleet in order to stay competitive. With this backstory in mind, we can now dive into what is possibly the biggest shakeup yet for the industry. We will learn about their background, what they provide, and how they changed the trajectory of the mainstream cruise ship market forevermore. As you may have noticed in the previous section, Royal Caribbean loves to give their upcoming projects names. As Richard Fain explains, beyond frameworks, we also found that the energy around a project could be influenced by something as simple as its name. 2016 was an important year for the company, with the launch of both Harmony and Ovation of the Seas within weeks of each other. Additionally, their sister line, Celebrity Cruises, was in the beginnings of a project that would kickstart a new generation of cruise ships as a result of the raft of innovative features found on the ships, as well as a new designing process first utilized with them. With competition at an all-time high, and knowing more could be done to take the company into the future, the time was right, once again, to create something that would blow the mainstream cruise line market out of the water. Before starting the beginnings of concept and design, a project name needed to be chosen. In 2016, we decided that the time was right to build something totally new for the Royal Caribbean brand, and we thought we had an opportunity to create something special. We spent some time discussing the project name, and quickly focused on Project Icon as an aspirational name. Aspirational because, to be iconic, something needs to be timeless, recognizable, and influential. We knew that if we used that name, we would have to be unrelenting in executing a transformational design. But we also knew that the name would help give meaning to our ambitions, and help everyone rally around the goal. The name Project Icon helped frame every discussion, and I believe helped galvanize a determination to create something that lived up to its name, something iconic. And so Project Icon was born, and on October 10th, 2016, it was officially revealed to the public. A memorandum of understanding was signed with a longtime partner, a shipyard in Turku, Finland named Meyer Turku. Their most recent builds for Royal Caribbean were Oasis and Allure of the Seas. The subsequent press release did not disclose much, but it did state that 2 ships were to be built, and were expected to be delivered in Q2 2022 and Q2 2024. Additionally, the ships would be able to accommodate roughly 5,000 passengers in double occupancy and implement new technologies, including being powered by LNG or liquefied natural gas. They would become the first ships in the fleet to be powered with this type of fuel. And so the chatter and speculation began. For the next few years, hardly anything official was discussed about the project. The only official news that came out before 2020 was the ordering of a 3rd member, which occurred in July of 2019. Despite the radio silence, enthusiasts were able to find out a little more information. This included finding that the name Icon of the Seas had been trademarked roughly a week after the initial announcement, that the ships would be roughly 200,000 tons in displacement, and that at some point the berth count was updated from 5,000 to 5,600. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of work occurring to live up to the project name, some of which we will discuss later on. Starting with Sovereign of the Seas, Royal Caribbean had used a special committee to take all of the ideas and concepts from different architects, design teams, and crew to debate, implement, challenge, and approve their wants or needs. This team is known as the Steering Committee, and it was definitely in overdrive. One of the things looked at early on with this design was passenger flow, which was a bit of an issue in certain areas on the Oasis-class ships. Richard Fain describes the process of solving this issue as follows. In order to make it easy to get around the ship, the outside of each space should make it obvious what is happening inside. Our guests should be able to understand what is available in each neighborhood without having to read signs or look at maps. It should be intuitive with a casual glance. To make sure this is done properly, we created a transition team to do nothing but look at transition areas between spaces. That sounds extreme, but it results in a more interesting and fluid design. A clear mission early on was to add as many WoW features to the ship as possible, but that presented another load of challenges by themselves. Many of these concepts are also expensive, and we need to find economies to help pay for them. Again, we set up special teams looking for savings. One, called the Weight Watchers, focus on opportunities to reduce the weight of the vessel itself, since weight is very expensive on a ship. Other teams included a team dedicated to reducing food wastage, general cost savings, and living quarters, dining, and entertainment for the crew. The point of each of these teams was to approach each topic with an intentionality that could not be achieved as part of an overall design process. Probably one of the biggest things the design team wanted to implement on this ship was for it to be an outward-looking vessel, which was something the Oasis class suffered in achieving. One space they especially wanted to do this was the Royal Promenade, which had at best on previous ships 2 skylights to allow natural light to come in from above. It is hard to overstate how successful the Royal Promenade on the Oasis-class ships have been. This promenade had transformed the experience for so many, and nothing else at sea came close. The temptation to leave it alone was powerful. Nevertheless, we knew that to create something iconic, we could not accept that the Oasis Royal Promenade was good enough. We already had the fastest horse on the planet. We didn't want to build a faster one. Rather, we wanted to make something that was substantively better, something that could accurately be described as iconic. With so many different minds and talents coming together in this fashion, it is a wonder how any progress is made or final design created. As Fain explained while Voyager of the Seas was being designed back in the mid-1990s, it is not the most efficient way to do things, but I think it is one of the most innovative and creativity-generating ways I can think of, because we get everybody together, we get competing architects together in a room, watch each other present, and actually make constructive suggestions. Designing any cruise ship, let alone one as important as this one, is a gigantic and complex puzzle. It often takes years of different designs, concepts, mock-ups, and meetings before anything could be done at the shipyard. By the time 2018 was well underway, the first of several overall designs were created. The ship concept was clearly in its early stages, but some notable information can be seen. First is the parabolic bow, which had only been recently introduced to the cruise industry with Aida Prima and later on Celebrity Edge. There were 5 bow thrusters, a superstructure below the funnel of similar design to the Oasis class, and 20 lifeboats. All that we have covered in the last few minutes is just a small sampling of all of the complex ideas and problems that needed to be solved before the shipyard could begin their work. Would they be able to accomplish any of these tasks? We shall see. As a result of the global shutdowns that began in March of 2020, the cruise industry and shipbuilding schedules were thrown out of the window. It was a time of uncertainty and oftentimes silence. Royal Caribbean was not the only mainstream cruise line at the time with a new class on the way. Carnival Cruise Line was in the final stages of construction of their first megaship in over 2 decades, which was the lead ship in the Excel class, Mardi Gras. Norwegian Cruise Line had a new project on the way codenamed Project Leonardo, and MSC Cruises had just started construction on what was to be the industry's first real challenger to the Oasis class. Project Icon, like other projects, was not safe from delays and maybe even cancellation. Icon 1, now known as New Build 1400, was pushed back from Q2 2022 to Q3 2023. The completion of Icon 2, or New Build 1401, was pushed back from Q2 2024 to Q2 2025. And finally, Icon 3 was delayed to Q2 2026. Things looked bleak, but soon it began to turn around. Anticipating that the times would indeed get better, Royal Caribbean prepared for a big comeback in a myriad of ways, including the continuation in the designing of Project Icon. By summer 2021, the road to returning to normal was in sight. In late May, small hull sections were beginning to make their way from Neptune Werft in Germany to Meyer Turku, and speculation was that they were to be a part of Icon 1. In June, more good news came. The first ships in both Royal Caribbean International and Celebrity Cruises restarted operations for the first time out of North America in well over a year. And, best of all, on the 14th of June, construction officially began at Meyer Turku on New Build 1400. During the traditional steel cutting ceremony, her name was confirmed to be Icon of the Seas, and the plasma laser cut out multiple Crown and Anchor logos with the name in the middle. This was a departure from tradition, as it is normal in these ceremonies for the ship's silhouette to be carved out. Despite construction finally being underway, the now nearly 5-year-long wait of seeing what the Icon vessels would look like continued. Anticipation was reaching new levels, and the speculation continued, especially since by this point, the berth count update was becoming more well known. A jump from 5,000 to 5,600 was pretty drastic, especially considering that the new Wonder of the Seas count was 5,700. Fuel was added to that fire when, in May of 2022, it was reported that a Royal Caribbean executive stated that the Icon class would be bigger than the Oasis class. While that most likely meant bigger in gross tonnage, it was not made clear as to what parameters the Icon ships would be bigger. In the meantime, Icon's construction progressed at a rapid pace. On April 4, 2022, her keel was laid at Meyer Turku, and the assembly phase began. But there was still no reveal. Icon's superstructure was building up, and different unique structures were arriving on site. By the beginning of fall, the majority of her superstructure had already been put together. The official reveal had to be coming at any moment. Finally, 6 years and 10 days after the first announcement, a total of 2,191 days of waiting with unbearable anticipation, the world got their first look at Icon of the Seas on October 20th, 2022. To say that expectations were at the very least fulfilled or exceeded would be an understatement. While not all details were revealed, enough of the ship had been released to cause an even greater level of anticipation. The confirmation of her being the largest passenger ship ever built, the focus on multi-generational families, the largest water park at sea, a super modern design, a massive dome housing a new aqua theater, and the outward-facing concept were just the tip of the iceberg of everything this series of ships would be bringing. It became more clear than ever that all of the work Royal Caribbean had made over the course of 6 years and the building up of the hype machine had worked when Icon's first cruises went on sale on October 24th. Prices started slightly higher than normal, but that was to be expected with the launch of a new ship. Within 12 hours, numerous voyages had nearly sold out, and cabins had at least doubled in price. The maiden voyage alone virtually sold out within 2 days. It was the fastest we ever sold a ship, the best booked position by a ship at this point from a social media and media buzz. It's been the best product launch we've ever had, so it's been a home run success. As we went public with it, the response has been overwhelming. As Royal Caribbean released more information about Icon over the coming months, prices continued to rise. In the meantime, Icon herself was fully assembled, launched, fitted out, went on 2 separate sea trials, and was prepared for delivery. On November 27, 2023, Icon was formally delivered to Royal Caribbean from Meyer Turku, and preparations were made for final outfitting in Spain. She arrived there roughly a week later for final construction work, minor repairs, and refueling for the next part of her journey, the transatlantic crossing. As 2024 began, Icon was nearing the Caribbean Sea, and in doing so, was giving the Caribbean cruise market their first look at this new marvel of shipbuilding. On January 10th, she entered her home port for the first time after brief stops in both Puerto Rico and Royal Caribbean's private island, Perfect Day at Coco Cay in the Bahamas. After several pre-inaugural sailings and her official naming ceremony, Icon departed Miami on her maiden voyage on January 27, 2024. To sum it up, the maiden voyage was absolutely spectacular, an experience I and thousands of others will never forget. Between her smart design, record-breaking milestones, the hype machine that had been built up, the captivation of the general public, and the immediate impact on the industry, Icon is a true once-in-a-generation ship. She was a smashing success in those first voyages, but now the question was, would this momentum continue? As time progressed, it became clear that Icon was not seeing a drop in being a runaway moneymaker. Cruises stayed nearly or entirely sold out, and prices continued to remain high. Satisfaction was high, and demand was not slowing down. It still seems somewhat mind-boggling over 2 years removed at this point that demand is still sky high. Thankfully, Icon was not going to have to carry this burden all by herself. She had multiple sisters on the way. Star of the Sea's beginnings occurred at the exact same time as Icon, having been a part of the Memorandum of Understanding signed with Meyer Turku back in October of 2016. At the time, she was simply known as Project Icon 2. As planned from the beginning, Icon 2 was to have 5,000 berths and be roughly 200,000 gross tons in displacement. And, like Icon 1, hardly anything official was mentioned about the vessel. The first bit of official movement on the part of Icon 2 came on January 14, 2023. To provide a bit of context, Icon had only just been launched from the dry dock at Meyer Turku a few weeks prior, and was in the beginnings of outfitting. On several of their social media platforms, Royal Caribbean asked the general public to help in the naming of Icon 2, saying, "We want to hear from you. Which is your favorite for our second Icon-class ship?" There were 4 choices, and the options were Star of the Seas, Idol of the Seas, Love of the Seas, and Queen of the Seas. Personally, I picked Star, as it seemed very fitting in my mind, and honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of the other choices. In the end, Star won, receiving 44% of the vote. Now, was this a serious poll, or them just having a bit of fun? Honestly, it was hard to tell. I figured it was not going to lead to anything. However, it should be noted that Royal Caribbean had used online polls like this in the past to name several of their ships, most famous of which included Oasis and Voyager. Senior Vice President and Chief Product Officer Jay Schneider did comment on the name a few months prior, saying, "I'm still taking ideas on Icon 2 and Icon 3. I feel really confident in the name we have for Icon 3. It's actually 2 that we're still working on." Eagle-eyed individuals also noticed that in searching on the trademark database, that out of those 4 name choices, the only name that appeared was Star of the Seas. having been filed back in June of 2022. Though Icon 2 had not yet begun construction, her time was clearly nearing, with her expected debut being sometime in Q2 2025 and construction expected to take a little more than 2 years. Her time to start construction had to occur at any moment. Icon was at the fitting out berth, and TUI Cruises Mein Schiff 7 was just now beginning to be assembled in the dry dock, which allowed for another cruise ship to start the steel cutting and grand block assembly process. Indeed, the time was near. On February 14, 2023, exactly 1 month after the poll was released, the steel cutting ceremony for new build 1401 was performed. In typical Royal Caribbean fashion, anticipation had to be in the air, so the name of Icon 2 was not announced. However, there was another positive during the event. Unlike Icon's steel cutting ceremony, the ship's silhouette was carved out, as the reveal of Icon had already occurred in October of the previous year, so there was no need at this point to keep that a secret. After the ceremony concluded, work began immediately to start creating the hundreds of thousands of individual steel parts that would make up the ship. Once enough parts of a particular section were created, assembly of the grand blocks within the warehouses could begin. As winter gave way to spring and then early summer, 1401's grand blocks were slowly but surely coming together. By early and mid-June, as Icon prepared for her first round of sea trials and her portside name text was being painted, an important piece of 1401 arrived at the shipyard. It was the Pearl. What is the Pearl? Well, to answer that question, we must first take a look at the venue where this piece would be taking center stage, the Royal Promenade. As stated previously, one of the main goals of the Icon-class design team was to make the ship as outward-looking as possible. This included having, for the first time, large horizontal windows looking out to the side of the ship from the promenade. And these windows were going to be massive. What a difficult venture that was going to be alone. When the Royal Promenade was first conceived with Voyager of the Seas, the idea of putting what was essentially a giant hole in the middle of a ship was thought to be mad. How would the venue not cause the ship to damage itself? How would it stay together and support the superstructure around it? How would it meet the requirements for fire protection? All very valid questions. One of the solutions to the structural support problem was to enclose the venue with heavily reinforced steel walls on all sides, essentially creating a steel cocoon around the venue. This worked very well and was utilized for the Voyager, Freedom, and Oasis-class ships. But now, with Royal Caribbean wanting to essentially put 2 giant holes in the side and wanting to make the venue extremely wide and columnless, the rigid cocoon design philosophy was no longer an option. Royal Caribbean eventually landed on a promenade design which would be 362 feet long and be at its maximum 140 feet wide. Talk about a massive change in the width alone, as the average maximum width of a promenade before was 62 feet. There was a lot of space to play with. One thing that Royal Caribbean, and especially Richard Fain, were fans of implementing was this idea coined by famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright called compression and expansion. The idea is to create a sense of movement and a change in emotion as one transitions from a narrow, low, and maybe darker space into a wide open, bright, and high space. Royal Caribbean had used this technique in various ways on previous ships, especially in the areas where passengers would be boarding for the first time. They now wanted to take that idea to the extreme, utilizing the center of the promenade with one of the 2 openings in the side. The question was now this: what could be put in the center to really seal the deal? Fain explains what happened next. With this expanded Royal Promenade, we asked the architect whether there was some novel way to take advantage of the larger footprint and the additional level. After some extensive study,
He suggested embellishing the design with a large sphere called the Pearl, taking inspiration from the library in Tianjin in China and the Hayden Planetarium in New York. The Pearl would take advantage of all the new features that distinguish this ship from others: the larger footprint, the greater connection to the sea, and the fluidity of the design. It would provide a focal point, something beautiful but unexpected. And so the roughly 50-foot wide Pearl was born, but it initially was just a solid orb. Within the center of it would be numerous columns to help support the superstructure above, which would allow for a massive opening in the port side of the promenade. Richard Fink consulted with Hari Kalavara, Executive VP of Maritime and New Building, about what else could be done to open up the promenade. Hari and the Finnish shipyard came up with a solution, an inspired one. Instead of making the Pearl a large spherical object that was inserted into the space, they said, why not use the Pearl as part of the structure? A sphere is one of nature's strongest shapes. By making the Pearl support the structure, we had a double win, a clever, aesthetically pleasing solution to a complex technical challenge. I particularly like the fact that it feels natural in the space, not something added, but something that feels like it was always meant to be. With the Pearl now being a part of the structure, and not just an art piece covering up a bunch of columns in the middle, the inside could be utilized, further opening up the space and allowing for even more natural light to flood inside. As finished, the Pearl has 3,000 kinetic tiles on the inside that are able to move and create different patterns and color backlighting, which allows the space to feel more alive. Running up the center of the structure is a staircase, which is one of 3 in the promenade. This would serve as the central staircase, with the others being on either end of the promenade. Another issue found with the Oasis-class promenade design was that the second level could not be utilized by passengers for the most part, and that it did not connect from one side to the other. This sometimes resulted in a more crowded main level and flow issues. On the Icon promenades, the second level would be entirely open and connected, and rather than having one staircase in the back, it would have 3 separate staircases, one on each end and one in the middle, which would help to both move passengers around easier and prevent bottlenecking. So, in summary, what is the Pearl? As Jay Schneider describes, it's a bit art, a bit sculpture, a bit experience, a bit wow, but all in an architectural marvel. The Pearl is just one of many different multifunctional experiences and complex features that Icon and her sisters will be implementing. The Pearl may not have been necessary to make Icon of the Seas special, but it certainly made her unforgettable. When 1401's Pearl reached the shipyard for the first time, it was only the steel frame, finished in a black color, but it soon would be transformed into one of the most memorable attractions on the ship. For much of the rest of the summer and the early fall, no new news came out, and no views of any of 1401's grant blocks could be seen easily. The assembly phase could not start until Mine Chief 7 vacated the dry dock, and she could not do that until Icon left the shipyard for the final time. But it was fast approaching, as Icon was scheduled to leave the shipyard sometime in late November, and Mine Chief 7 was entering the final stages of assembly. On October 5, 2023, the first in a round of big milestones and news in almost a year began, and it kicked off in the form of finally releasing 1401's name. To the surprise of some, including myself, the name chosen was the very same that had won in the poll Royal Caribbean released back in January, Star of the Seas. She would be joining the fleet in summer of 2025, although information regarding her home port and itineraries were not included. The idea of combining the best of every type of vacation into one ultimate adventure has created more excitement than ever anticipated, and Star of the Seas will be the next bold answer to the record-breaking consumer demand we've seen for nearly a year, and counting with Icon of the Seas. Icon is literally the best performing new product launch we've ever had in the history of our business, and we're delighted with the volume and rate, and that really is a full 24 product. Since Icon of the Seas was revealed almost a year ago, the response has been unprecedented by every measure. Michael Bailey was definitely not exaggerating when talking about the high level of demand for the Icon class. Along with the cruise line seeing the largest amount of bookings in one day, and the highest volume booking week when Icon was revealed, Icon's 2025 and 2026 lineup had to be released 3 months prior to the beginnings of the rest of the fleet. Royal Caribbean Group CEO Jason Liberty made this comment regarding the demand back in May. Despite being on sale for only 5 months, Icon is significantly more booked for her inaugural season at materially higher rates than any other Royal Caribbean ship launch. Within a few weeks of the name announcement, 1401's first hull pieces began to arrive at Meyer Turku by barge. In late November, her FERU, or Floating Engine Room Unit, left the Neptune Werft yard after being completed and began its journey from Germany to Finland. On November 30th, just a few days after Icon left Meyer Turku for Cadiz, Spain, the home port for Star was revealed to be Port Canaveral, Florida, and that bookings for her cruises would open up on December 6th for the general public. In all reality, her home port location was largely expected to be Canaveral for multiple reasons, chief among which is its close proximity to Orlando and everything it offers to vacationers. Michael Bailey hinted at a more aggressive policy when it came to the Orlando market back in 2022. The Icon product, along with Perfect Day, with the kinds of experiences that we're offering, with the kind of new accommodations that we have on Icon, and the experiences that we have for young families, older families, and of course couples and singles and what have you, is really squarely standing shoulder to shoulder with Orlando and those kinds of destinations. And what we're beginning to see is us moving the Royal brand into that space far more aggressively. Additionally, Utopia of the Seas, which would debut roughly a year before Star in Canaveral as the second largest passenger ship ever built, would be changing the entire perception and landscape of the weekend cruise market and cause a shakeup on a somewhat similar level to Icon. The idea of having these two game-changing ships running out of the same port and rivaling the Orlando land vacation market was simply too good of an idea to pass up on. Roughly a week later, the itineraries were released, which showed that Star would be performing a somewhat similar lineup to Icon. In her case, Star would be performing one type of 7-night lineup to the Western Caribbean and 3 different types of cruises to the Eastern Caribbean. Her maiden voyage was scheduled to commence on August 17, 2025. With Icon no longer at Meyer Turku and Mein Chief 7 fully assembled, the new TUI Cruises ship was launched from the dry dock and moved to the fitting out pier. This finally gave room for 1401 to be assembled. On December 7th, her 6 main engines, 3 Wärtsilä 14V 46DFs and 3 Wärtsilä 12V 46DFs, were brought to the shipyard. A few days after that, her FERU arrived on site. It would not be long before the assembly phase would begin. It's now December 15th, 2023. Icon was about halfway through her stay at the dry dock in Cadiz, Spain, and her first sister was entering the next milestone of construction. It was a dim, cold, and gray overcast day in Turku, but spirits were high as 1401's assembly phase commenced with the keel laying ceremony. For context, the block that would be placed into the dry dock is located below and slightly aft of where the Pearl would eventually sit. Below the piece, a handful of coins were placed on the supporting blocks prior to the whole piece being lowered. They are meant to give the ship good fortune, and they would be retrieved following her launching. Myra Turku's dry dock is roughly 1,200 feet long and 260 feet wide, with 1401's length being just shy of 1,197 feet. It was absolutely imperative that the block be placed in the right spot. A slight misalignment at this stage would mean that either the bow or stern pieces would not fit, and the entire hull would not be supported correctly by the blocks underneath. With the assistance of multiple lasers, the block was carefully lowered into the correct spot, and the assembly phase of 1401 was now underway. Star of the Seas is very significant to both the shipyard and its partner network. The 13,000 man-years spent to build the ship create employment and business in Finland. Upon completion, Star of the Seas will reinforce a completely new type of cruise experience to the standards set by its sister ship, Icon. By mid-January, the assembly of 1401 was well underway, and numerous ground blocks awaiting placement on the ship were being staged near the dry dock. Icon was performing the first of her short pre-inaugural voyages at this time. Yet with Icon not even being officially out yet, people were already asking what would set Star apart. With almost all of the structural elements of 1401 having already been completed, and Icon having received at best very early reviews, it wasn't the most realistic idea to think that Star would be vastly different. However, Jay Schneider, the man who would largely be in charge of Star's upbringing, did indicate a few minor changes were indeed coming and clarified additional perceptions. First, he made it pretty clear that Star, as well as Icon 3, would not be bigger than Icon. They would all be the same size. Second, he indicated that the 1920s New York-themed Empire Supper Club, which is a very high-end and exclusive specialty restaurant on Icon, would be themed around Chicago, and that Icon 3s would be centered around Hollywood. Lastly, he stated that Star would have an extra whirlpool. While in the original design for Icon, it was thought that the maximum allowable water weight had been exceeded, so it was subsequently cut. However, on Icon sea trials, it was discovered that they actually had more room to play with than originally thought, so the decision was made to add the whirlpool back to the design. There was no indication as to where the extra whirlpool would be. Roughly 2 months removed from the keel laying, the central hull pieces of 1401 had been welded into place and was reaching the height of the Royal Promenade. Because of this, the Pearl, now covered in a protective white foil, was placed into position within the venue. February 27th. The thousands of passengers booked on the maiden voyage of Star, which included myself, received an email from Royal Caribbean giving us the news that the Maiden was being pushed from August 17th, 2025 to August 31st, 2025 due to the amount of work remaining to complete the ship. We were given several options, including changing to the new Maiden, switching to either Wonder or Icon on roughly the same dates, booking another Royal Caribbean cruise not listed, or receiving a full refund. Despite the disappointing but very understandable news of the delay, work on 1401 continued at a rapid pace. By early March, the first sections of the accommodation superstructure were being put together. The first sections installed were located just forward of the Pearl, and if one looked closely, the new whirlpool announced just a few months prior could be seen. It was going to be located just forward of the starboard lime and coconut bar on deck 15. With spring came warmer temperatures, and that was the perfect time to start work on the assembly of yet another mind-blowing structure on the ship, AquaDome. AquaDome is one of 8 neighborhoods on the Icon ships, and is a giant 367-ton, 164-foot long, and 82-foot high structure made up of 673 glass panels, as well as 712 aluminum panels. Another big focus in designing this class was to create as many venues as possible that were filled with a variety of features that would enable the space to be utilized in some capacity throughout the day and night, rather than having a giant space that was never utilized except for one particular moment. AquaDome is a fine example of this concept. At its heart is the Aqua Theater, which was not a new concept for Royal Caribbean, as it had appeared on all previous Oasis-class ships, but its location compared to those ships had drastically changed. Surrounding the venue are multiple shops and restaurants, including the new AquaDome Marketplace, which offers grab-and-go offerings in 5 different types of cuisines. Located at the forwardmost position is the Overlook, a lounge and viewing area that offers 220-degree views outside. What a breathtaking space that is alone. All of these features combine to create a place that can indeed be utilized throughout the entire day. AquaDome from the outside, let alone standing in the middle of it, never fails to impress, and it often makes one wonder how something like this was able to be pulled off. AquaDome was actually not in the original plans for Icon, as can easily be seen in the 2018 concept. Its beginnings started with the desire to retain the Aqua Theater concept on the Oasis ships, but move it forward and higher up, which presented a myriad of challenges by itself. They also wanted the venue to be enclosed, so that outside factors like high winds and rain would no longer be a problem, as it had been on the Oasis ships. A dome was needed. Right off the bat, they had to solve their first problem: weight. As Fane explains, unfortunately, the concern about weight seemed insurmountable. Adding 1 ton of weight on the top of the ship requires almost 10 tons of weight in the bottom for balance, and a dome of that scale would weigh hundreds of tons. Since a full dome seemed impossible, the early designs called for a much smaller space with a modest dome, but we kept being unimpressed by those early designs. The space was adequate, but only just, and it couldn't contain any of the gee-whiz features we wanted. A meeting was scheduled in Miami between the key leaders from both Royal Caribbean and Meyer Turku to try and come up with something that would do better. The discussion was animated and productive. Was it possible to put a dome that weighed hundreds of tons on top of this ship? How might such a dome be created in practice? How could it be connected with the rest of the ship so that traffic flow was easy? Could we live with a half dome in front and a more traditional structure on the back half? No. How could we handle the heat load of so much glass? What about the weight of the water? Did it really need to be 15 feet deep? Yes. What happened next was a true West Wing moment. At one point we decided that we needed a break. We left the high-tech cave room to utilize another piece of technology, a coffee machine. But while we gathered around, our discussions continued. With no paper on hand, we resorted to sketching our ideas on a napkin. It felt like a cliche, but in an era when no one carries pencil or paper, we were lucky someone had a pen. By the time we were done, the drawing was barely legible, but it didn't matter. We had a shared vision of what we wanted. We didn't yet know how we were going to build it, but we understood what it needed to be. The Meyer team, together with Hari Kolavara, went back to the shipyard and worked out how such a dome could be made. As time went on, the concept started to become more and more feasible. But there was still one thing that was staring them in the face. How in the world were they actually going to build this thing? It was all fine and well once it was actually on the ship, where it would be at full strength. But without any support from the surrounding structures, would it be possible to build it independently and then move it without it damaging itself? The dome itself is massive, and you can't just hook up a few cables and lift it like a car engine. The structure of the dome had to be kept perfectly level. Any deformation of more than 3 inches across its 32,000 square foot surface would cause catastrophic damage, shattering many of the custom glass panels. Over the course of about a year, the shipyard worked out how to both build such a structure and how to lift it onto the ship. First, the dome would be assembled via 12 individual modules, then be fully assembled right by the vessel, utilizing scaffolding to support it underneath. Once it was complete and ready for installation, a custom-made structure weighing in at 155 tons called the spreader would be attached to the massive gantry crane utilizing 12 cables. The spreader would then be connected to the dome with 54 cables that would help spread the forces evenly. It would be a very delicate and long operation to move the structure, so the parameters for the lift were very tight. A special team was assigned the task to find the right slot to make the move. Wind would be the greatest challenge. For Icon, the operation took place on the night of December 4th, 2022. It was a long process. The final fitting of the dome to the ship took 6 hours of painstaking work alone. In the end, no damage or shattering of any of the glass panels occurred. It was the largest single structure of glass and steel ever installed on a passenger ship. But before the dome design was finalized, there was one more issue to resolve. How tall should the diving platforms be for the Aqua Theater? Michael Bailey and I had one final disagreement. The highest diving platform on Oasis was at 55 feet high, and our shows usually end with some of the divers making that crazy jump. However, the AquaDome only had room for a 49-foot dive. Michael wanted to make a diving platform on Icon that was at least 1 inch higher. Personally, I thought a standard 9-foot dive was already scary, and a 55-foot dive was crazy. We compromised by doing it Michael's way. We added an oculus at the top, which allowed a diver to climb into a cupola in the dome and dive from a full 55 feet 1/4 inch. AquaDome is an absolutely incredible structure and neighborhood, and was my personal favorite venue to utilize on Icon. Now, in mid-April 2024, 1401's 12 AquaDome modules have been finished. The time had come to commence the full assembly in the same location where Icons had been put together roughly a year and a half prior. At roughly the same time, her bow pieces arrived on the scene, and the bridge grand block was staged outside by the dry dock. By mid-May, all 12 modules of AquaDome had been assembled together. 1401 herself still had a long way to go, but the majority of her central superstructure had been installed. Just ahead of 1401 was Mine Chief 7, whom at this point had been virtually completed. She departed the shipyard for the last time on June 11th, leaving the fitting out pier empty, ready for when 1401 was launched. In the days that followed Mine Chief 7's departure, 1401's bridge grand block was installed, aft superstructure fully assembled, and 1401 herself received a visitor. Staged right next to her starboard bow was the Pearl destined for her sister, now only known as New Build 1402 or Icon 3. She had already had her steel cutting ceremony back in January. On July 11th, 1401's 3 20 megawatt ABB Azipods arrived at the shipyard. Each Azipod has a 5-bladed propeller and produces roughly 27,000 horsepower apiece. Additional propulsion includes 5 4.8 megawatt Wärtsilä WTT-45 CP bow thrusters, each producing 6,400 horsepower. Things were really starting to come together in early July, and 1401 was really beginning to look like a completed ship. However, there was one glaring thing missing from her forward superstructure: the AquaDome. Like Icon before, the window to install the structure was very small, and it was all down to a special team to find the right time. Wind was the main enemy, needing to be below 10 miles per hour. The spreader had already been staged roughly 1,500 feet away from the dome, ready to be attached at any moment. In the afternoon of July 17, the spreader was attached to the crane and moved to the AquaDome. The 54 cables were then connected at the designated points. At 0200 local time the next morning, the operation began. By daybreak, it had been completed successfully. 1401 was very close to being fully assembled by this point, with only the funnels, aft towers, and azipods remaining. All of these were put into place within the next few weeks. She was now ready for launching, but it surprisingly did not happen right away. For the next month, she sat in the dry dock with work continuing all around. Around this time, more information was beginning to be revealed about the future Star of the Seas, as Icon had been in service for over 6 months, and Utopia had begun her career roughly a month prior. Star was now the focus. Most of the announcements included minor updates to various venues, particularly in Surfside. Surfside is another of the 8 neighborhoods found on these ships, and it is largely focused on young families and children. The venue had largely been designed on Icon to focus on kids aged 0 to 6, and the desire was to increase that to 10 on Star. Splashaway Bay and the pool at the aft, called Water's Edge, would be receiving minor upgrades. The most expensive suite on the ship, the Ultimate Family Townhouse, which averaged $70,000 per cruise on Icon, would be getting an uplift. One interesting thing that was released was a survey asking cruisers for potential new ideas regarding a dining venue within Surfside called Pier 7, which is a specialty dining venue on Icon evoking a surfer restaurant found in California. Despite the existence of the survey, no official announcements were released indicating changes were indeed coming for the venue. However, Jay Schneider did seem to add to the idea of there being changes. Other small changes announced included updates to the lighting in the Pearl, facial recognition technology for a select number of cabins, changes in the offerings in the kids' clubs, and updates to several other dining venues. As the launching of 1401 approached, all equipment was removed from the dry dock, electricity disconnected, and numerous hull inspections, both outside and inside, were carried out. At last, on September 25, 2024, the process of launching 1401 started with a traditional firing of a cannon. Afterwards, the 2 main valves were opened, and water began to flood the dry dock. However, it was not flooded all the way. Unexpected high winds engulfed the region, and it was deemed not safe enough to fill the dock completely, which would allow the ship to move around within the very tight space. Though partially filled, 1401 was not buoyant yet, and she continued to sit on the support blocks for the next few days. On September 28th, the winds finally calmed down enough to allow for the transfer. The flooding at the dry dock was resumed, and 4 tugs arrived to help pull 1401 out. 3 days and 92 million gallons of water after the ceremony, the ship was floating for the first time. One was now at the fitting out pier, ready for the last major stage of construction, fitting out. Within the month, work began on a number of smaller exterior features, including the installation of the 6 water slides within the Category 6 water park. Category 6 is a part of the Thrill Island neighborhood and is also a product of yet another mission in designing the Icon class: to add as much water as possible on the upper decks. In a similar manner to the issues seen with AquaDome, adding a large amount of water on a level never seen before, even on the Oasis-class ships, would prove to be very difficult. When it comes to the water park itself, the concept started with 5 slides, and they can be seen as early as 2019 in the overall design concept. The idea of adding a 6th slide came at the same time as deciding what the name of the water park would be. Now came the challenges of creating such a venue, complete with 6 complex and potentially record-breaking water slides. Where would the slides begin and end? How would it affect the ship's stability? How would wind affect both the passengers utilizing the venue as well as the performance of the ship? Would its close proximity to the funnels be an issue? How could passengers utilizing the slides be spread out to prevent bottlenecking? One of the brilliant solutions to some of these problems was the idea of not having all the slides start from the same place. Rather, they would start from 2 different areas. The water park was going to take up almost the entirety of the aft starboard part of Deck 16, and near the end of that deck are 2 massive towers which serve as essentially small funnels. In the early designs, these towers simply functioned as that. But then came the idea of having half of the water slides being accessible via a staircase on one of those aft towers, and the other 3 starting on the complete opposite side. This design change can be seen in the 2021 concept. This seemingly simple idea was a great one, solving a number of small issues in the process, including lessening the length of any potential lines, preventing bottlenecking, allowing for passengers to find the slide they want to go on easier, and in some ways, turn the large aft towers from being purely utilitarian funnels and made them into a required feature of the water park itself. The 6 slides that were introduced on Icon were all record-breaking in their own way. Each slide has a distinctive color, which helps solve another round of issues. The biggest thing was that it allowed for passengers to identify which slides to go on easier, and when combined with the color of the slide being painted onto the deck and staircases, it made knowing which line to get into a lot simpler. The green and pink slides are the first family raft slides put to sea. The name of the green slide is Storm Surge, and is the more extreme of the 2, with at one point the raft and its occupants being catapulted up the side of a semi-transparent lotus leaf wall. The pink slide's name is Hurricane Hunter and is more tame. Yellow is known as the Pressure Drop, and is the first open freefall slide at sea, featuring a 66-degree incline right at the beginning. Those 3 slides are the ones located forward. The first of the aft tower slides is the Frightening Bolt, which is orange. It is the tallest drop slide at sea, featuring a 46-foot drop. The last 2, finished in different hues of blue, are the Storm Chasers. They are the first duo mad racing slides at sea, and are 431 feet long each, which is over 1/3 of the entire ship's length. The Category 6 water park is an intense and exhilarating feature. Its sheer size is undeniable, especially in person. It definitely puts any other waterslide complex or even water parks found on any other cruise ship to shame. As fall took over in Turku, numerous canvas sheets were erected around 1401, which would help shield workers from the potential harsh winter weather and aid in retaining as much heat as possible on the inside. At roughly the same time the first snow arrived in late November, the first of 1401's 18 Palfinger MPC-49 lifeboats arrived in Turku. Each lifeboat has a capacity of 450. On December 8th, 1401 was forced to move slightly forward in the fitting out pier to allow for Icon 3's FVRU to enter the dry dock. Her keeling ceremony had occurred almost 2 months prior. After the dry dock was closed, 1401 was moved back to its original position. It's now early 2025. Winter was still biting hard, but the majority of the numerous openings in especially the accommodation section were now filled and weatherized. As a result, the extensive canvas sheets started to be taken down, showing the progress made over the last few months. On January 28th, some unexpected news came out. With Star debuting in roughly 8 months, it was announced that she was going to be arriving earlier than expected. While the August 31st sailing would continue to be the maiden voyage, 2 4-night showcase sailings were added ahead of the maiden, with the first starting on August 23rd. Not even 2 months after the new sailings were announced, another pre-inaugural showcase sailing was added. This one, however, was a 3-night itinerary. At this point, Star was now going to start sailing on August 20th. As temperatures began to trend warmer, work on the exterior, including the final paintwork, could begin. On April 10th, the LNG refueling ship Corellius arrived at Turku from Norway to give 1401 her first load of LNG fuel in preparation for her upcoming sea trials. The process of fueling took about 12 hours to complete. At the same time, the first 2 of the 18 lifeboats were lifted into position. At this point, cold temperatures were no longer a factor, and the canvas sheets were now all taken away. Paintwork on the exterior was rapidly underway. As it had been done with Icon, the port side name text was the first to be painted on, which commenced sometime in mid-April. The starboard name text followed shortly thereafter in early May. The pieces were starting to come together, and only a few milestones remained between now and the first sailing. The next one was a big one: sea trials. This event is an important one for any ship. Over the course of sometimes weeks, the ship is at sea for the first time, and everything is tested. From all the electronics to various speeds, turning radiuses, crash stops, maneuverability, anti-fire systems. Literally anything and everything is checked and rechecked. At one point, the ship is forced to start rolling from side to side to see how it handles and whether or not it meets passenger comfort standards. These trial runs are also the perfect time to find any faults in any of the systems, especially in the power generation and propulsion systems. In preparation, on May 9th, 1401 went through a series of inclining tests at the fitting out pier in order to get an early idea of the ship's stability and to find its actual center of gravity. The tests involved the use of a single tug, which was tied to the forward starboard side. The whole endeavor lasted a little under 4 hours. Trials were scheduled to begin on May 18th. However, as it had happened on both of Icon's sea trial runs, the departure time was delayed from the evening of the 18th to the morning of the 19th. Daylight broke over the shipyard on the morning of May 19th, and with 2,700 crew on board, including maritime personnel, specialists, and inspectors, 1401 departed Meyer Turku for the first time. Due to the shallowness of the area surrounding the shipyard, she was assisted out by several tugs before she steamed out under her own power. For the next 8 days, 1401 was put through hundreds of tests, drills, and inspections. By the afternoon of the 26th, the tests had largely been completed, and she began to make her way back towards the shipyard. During the early hours of the 27th, she met up with 2 tugs which would assist her back to the fitting out pier. The trials officially concluded by sunrise. She had done well. During her speed runs, she achieved an average speed of 25 knots. The very next day, yet another sailing was announced to be tagged into the schedule. Now, along with 1 3-night and 2 4-night pre-inaugural showcase sailings, an additional 4-night cruise was added, and it would commence on August 16th. This would be the last of the changes to Star's schedule. Ironically enough, taking into account all of the changes that occurred in the last year and a half, Star would now be sailing 1 day earlier than the original maiden voyage. Now, it was a race against time to finish 1401, enough for her final departure. Her maiden voyage was just several months away, and some of the work that needed to be done had to be carried out away from the shipyard. Her vast interiors were beginning to show their final form, but finishing work was far from done. The countdown was on. It is now June. The last full month 1401 would be at Turku. Things were really coming together. Her exterior had been virtually completed, special artwork was starting to be painted in various locations, and most excitingly, she was now joined with 2 other sisters at the yard. In mid-June, the first pieces of Icon 4 began to arrive, and just behind 1401, Icon 3, now confirmed to be named Legend of the Seas, was in the final stages of assembly in the dry dock. July 10, 2025. 2 years, 4 months, and 26 days after the first steel was cut, 1401 was officially handed over to Royal Caribbean International, becoming the 29th member of the fleet. The signing of documents turning over possession of the vessel took place near the bottom of the starboard stairs in the Overlook, the exact same spot where Icon's transfer happened. The completion of Star of the Seas is another significant step in Royal Caribbean Group's journey toward a completely new type of vacation experience. We are proud to bring this new generation vacation experience to life at Meyer Turku Shipyard, together with our esteemed partners. 1401 was now under the possession of her owners, but she was not fully completed. A number of minor and major finishing touches needed to be carried out. The planned schedule of completion was to do roughly the same thing Icon did before her arrival into the US. First was to sail to the Navantia shipyard in Cadiz, Spain, where the majority of the finishing work would be completed. Then sail to Ponce, Puerto Rico, make a quick stop in Coco Cay, then dock at her home port for the first time. But the day after delivery, there came the news of a potential change in the schedule. An unconfirmed report from Cadiz made the claim that 1401 was not going to be stopping at the Navantia shipyard, but instead would head for Algeciras, Spain, which is where Icon went after her stay in Cadiz for refueling in preparation for her transatlantic crossing. In the summer months of 2025, the shipyard in Cadiz was going through a workers' strike. In mid-June, Carnival Cruise Line's Carnival Liberty was in the dry dock for her routine maintenance check that has to be done every 5 years, when a group of workers attempted to seize the vessel. Later on, Liberty was able to leave, but far from being completed. She then headed to a dry dock in Marseille, France, in order to finish the maintenance work. No official statements were released as to what 1401 would actually be doing. However, she did remain at Turku for almost an additional week. In that time, one of the main things finalized that had been carried out in Cadiz with Icon was the completion of the Central Park neighborhood, which included the installation of more than 34,000 live plants. On the 13th, 1401 had her fuel tanks topped off again with LNG, this time from the bunker Carrillos. Preparations to ensure that she had all of the necessary provisions and supplies for the unfinished work were carried out. July 17. It was a clear and beautiful day in Turku. 1401 was ready to leave her birthplace for the final time and begin her first proper journey into the world. At 9:50 p.m., and with the sun still setting, the lines were brought in and the supporting tugs began to move the great ship from the pier. She was on her way, and it was now clear that her next stop would indeed be Cadiz. For the next few days, 1401 made her way through the Baltic Sea, ready to take on her next obstacle, the Great Belt Bridge. The bridge is a part of a major road system which connects Denmark to several large islands to the east. The total length of the bridge is roughly 11 miles, but the main part, which is what 1401 had to cross under, is a little more than 22,000 feet long. Every cruise ship built in Turku has to pass under. There is no other way out. Required clearance of the suspension bridge is 213 feet. Icon previously crossed under the bridge with mere feet of clearance, and it was done in less than ideal conditions. 1401 would definitely have an easier time, as the day was virtually cloudless, clear, and the seas calm. As 1401 is substantially taller than the required clearance, preparations were made to allow her to squeeze under. First, her smokestacks were retracted. This feature had been around on Royal Caribbean ships since Oasis, and it got rid of most of the height that needed to be lost. Additionally, her speed was increased to nearly 20 knots. This would allow her to be pulled down slightly due to a phenomenon called the squat effect. She was now ready. Like her sister before, she went under with only a few feet to spare. On July 24, 1401 entered the port of Cadiz, but unlike Icon, she did not enter the dry dock. Rather, she was tied up to a nearby pier. This was probably because her stay would not be long. Just 2 days later, she left Cadiz behind and began her journey across the Atlantic. With the majority of her future crew now on board, the time was now for them to begin to both familiarize and to test the new venues out. 10,300 art pieces had to be installed, and the final trials of the new shows needed to be carried out. It was going to be a busy crossing. On August 4th, 1401 made her first stop in the Caribbean, Ponce, Puerto Rico. While there, she would host a small group of invited guests. After a few days there, she left Ponce behind and made her way to Coco Cay, where, on August 8th, one of the most incredible meetups ever in passenger ship history would occur. Two of the largest passenger ships ever built, two icons of the industry, together for the first time. Afterwards, 1401 made her way to her final destination, Port Canaveral. She was due to arrive there in the early hours of August 9th. She was now officially home. As per tradition when visiting a port for the first time, a special plaque was given to the ship. During this particular ceremony, which occurred in the Overlook Lounge on August 12th, Canaveral Port Authority CEO and Port Director Captain John Murray stated the following: "We are enormously proud of our longtime partnership with Royal Caribbean, and very excited to have this magnificent new ship join their fleet of vessels homeported here. Star of the Seas is a substantial addition and underscores the growing demand for cruising from our port. After months of planning, preparation, and facility improvements we've made, our team is ready to provide the high-quality guest experience that has become our hallmark. August 16th, 2025. The momentous day had finally come. 1401 was now ready to take on her first group of passengers in the first of 4 showcase sailings. As she left the pier at Terminal 1, several tugs came alongside and gave her a water salute. Hundreds upon hundreds gathered near the mouth of the port to watch as she put to sea for the first time with passengers. While at Coco Cay on this first voyage, she met up with essentially her main partner in the Canaveral market, Utopia of the Seas. The 2 newest ships in the fleet were now together. Following the conclusion of the first showcase sailing, the time had come to officially name 1401. On the evening of the 20th, the naming ceremony began.
This is a ceremony that goes back for thousands of years. It's incredibly meaningful. It's the moment of transition from dreaming, conceptualizing, building, creating, to actually delivering and operating. And this is this moment where we recognize the achievements of everybody who created this beautiful ship. And now we celebrate the life of the ship that's going to come over the next many decades.
Well, I think there's a few important components of a naming ceremony. First and foremost, it's to bless the ship, right? The second thing, it's this moment in time where the ship is now complete and ready for service, and now it gets to go and deliver these incredible vacation experiences. And so for us, these moments are always special. We have now 68 incredible ships in our fleet, and it's really just showing how we're continuing to push innovation.
Star really is a true testament to the spirit of our people and family. And only this family, the Royal Caribbean family, can bring to life something as unbelievably iconic as Star of the Seas. We set out to create the world's best family vacation, and together, we've done just that.
What a beautiful evening, what a beautiful ship. I'm Kelly Girardi, and I'm so incredibly honored to be here with you today as godmother of Star of the Seas. Such an honor. Thank you. A vacation on Star is the perfect combination of 2 of my greatest passions in life, embracing the spirit of exploration and creating lifelong memories with my family. So I'm very excited to be on this journey with Royal Caribbean. My hope to you is as you sail on Star, that your journeys are filled with joy, with adventure, with the spirit of adventure that unites us all, that we're here to celebrate, and lifelong memories with your family. Thank you for welcoming me into this community.
Kelly, will you please do us the honor of naming the ship?
I will. I name this ship Star of the Seas. May God bless her and all who sail on her.
On the 22nd, the newly named Star of the Seas met up with Icon for the second time at Coco Cay. August 31st, 2025. Star of the Seas, now having completed her 4 showcase sailings, departed Port Canaveral on her official maiden voyage. It was a 7-night cruise to the Western Caribbean, which included stops in the ports of Roatan, Honduras, Cozumel, Mexico, Costa Maya, Mexico, and Coco Cay. Star was now officially in service. At 248,663 gross tons, she shares the crown of being the largest passenger ship in history with Icon, though, as stated earlier, she is a few inches longer and 1 inch wider at the waterline. As Star continued on with her inaugural season, the biggest question of all could now start to be answered. Was all the success and fanfare that Icon had during her first year and a half of service going to continue over? The answer was resounding yes. Though the aura surrounding Icon's maiden was understandably gone, the fascination of the general public and the fact that despite the high prices, cruises are consistently near or completely sold out shows that the momentum continues. Even in my own personal life, being geographically and professionally far removed from the cruise industry, when cruise ships come up in conversation, Icon specifically is usually mentioned by name. Every time I'm ship spotting in Canaveral or Miami, strangers will always come up and ask about the Icon ships. Most of the time, almost none of them can name any other ship either in port or in general, but they know about the Icon vessels. That alone is a pretty momentous thing, a ship being a household name. What is it exactly that makes these ships so successful and popular? We have already discussed the circumstances behind Icon's debut, which definitely is a contributing factor, but another large element is the design itself. First, the desire to put on as many unforgettable wow features as possible was clearly achieved. The Pearl, Category 6 Waterpark, and the AquaDome are the best examples of this. Another positive found was how well passenger flow is, and how overcrowding is usually not an issue. One of the bigger issues with the Oasis class was how disconnected some of the neighborhoods were from each other. If one wanted to get access to a particular one, they sometimes had to go a third of the ship's length and up a few levels of stairs off to the side to get there. On Icon and Star, that issue has largely gone away. My favorite example is how Central Park can easily be accessed by the Royal Promenade. If I were in the middle of the promenade on Oasis and I wanted to go to Central Park, I had to go to either end of the venue and use the stairs located by the elevator banks. Now, on Star, I could walk one level through the Pearl, which is cool enough, then take a nearby staircase right into the heart of Central Park. It's seemingly small, but it makes the journey a lot quicker, easier, and quite frankly more enjoyable. A lot of the neighborhoods can easily be found, and passenger flow in and between those locations is very fluid. Another positive is definitely how alive the ships feel, and it's particularly thanks to the large variety in artwork and colors on especially the exterior public decks. Before these ships, with some minor exceptions, the finishes on the walls and various structures were just painted white. This is especially true in cruise ships built prior to the mid-2010s. As the late 2010s came in, a few smaller scale exterior artwork pieces were attempted, but with these ships, it was all in. We could definitely go on and on about the positives regarding these ships, so for the sake of time, we will leave it at that. However, there are some problems and negatives that have been found in the design. The first one we will discuss can be found on both Star and Icon, and it deals with Absolute Zero, which is the ice skating venue located at the very aft on Deck 5. Its main issue relates to how passengers enter and exit the space. The main thoroughfare requires people to go through the middle of Playmakers, which is a sports bar specialty restaurant. That venue, especially when a big game is on, is very busy by itself. Now try adding several hundred other people into the mix when a show in Absolute Zero ends. It's definitely one of the few times bottlenecking rears its head on this class. However, there are two additional exits out of the venue, and they both exit onto the jogging track. They are clearly labeled and point the direction of where the Royal Promenade is. However, 99% of people do not know those exits are there. When I was on Star, I purposely waited until the venue was almost empty to leave, and out of the hundreds that left before me, roughly 20 people utilized the side exits. Another issue, though very minor, is the topic of Cloud 17, which is the highest level of the Chill Island neighborhood. This is one of the very few areas where passenger flow is a bit of an issue. For example, if I am on Cloud 17 and I want to go to the other side of Chill Island on 16, I have to either go inside to the staircases by the elevator banks or walk all the way around the outside of Thrill Island in the back. There are a number of people that have commented about this minor problem. However, to counter this issue, one must remember that Cloud 17 was originally intended on Icon to be the adults-only venue. Right before her maiden, it was changed to be within the hideaway at the end of decks 15 and 16. So when keeping that in mind, it actually makes sense why the venue is largely isolated from the rest of Chill Island. There are a few other extremely minor issues, but they are not worth talking about in detail. When it comes to reviews I personally have heard and those found on websites such as Cruise Critic, most of the other issues listed do not deal with the ship's design. And so, in all honesty, the class does not have a lot of common faults, which is definitely a testament to both the design teams and the workers at Meyer Turku and Royal Caribbean. Is Star in the Icon class for everybody? Definitely not. They are literally the biggest of them all, and with that comes a lot of people. For example, on my cruise on Star in November 2025, there were roughly 7,300 passengers on board. Star's double occupancy rate is 5,610, and maximum passenger capacity is 7,600. The counter to that fear of there being too many people on board is that oftentimes you can never tell the ship is full. Because of the neighborhood concept and overall design, the ships do a very good job with spreading the passenger population out. Does overcrowding and bottlenecking happen? Yes, but it's usually at times and places when it's expected on virtually any ship, such as boarding day. The ships are also very focused on attracting multi-generational families, specifically younger families and children. As a result, there are quite a number of kids found on these ships, and for some, that is not something that they want to deal with in larger quantities on a cruise. At the end of the day, they are the finest and biggest examples of a cruise ship that encapsulates a theme park and resort style vacation. They offer so much and are designed to ensure that there will be something for everyone throughout the entire cruise. Are they for absolutely everybody? No. Are they perfect? No. There will never be a perfect cruise ship. Are they a good choice for those it's targeting, such as the non-cruiser and multi-generational families? Absolutely and positively, yes. With Star now in service, another question could be answered. What, if any, changes were implemented that are not found on Icon? The short answer is that, yes, there are differences between Icon and Star, but most of them are either tweaks or trivial in nature. As stated before, Star was already well under construction by the time Icon was receiving her first reviews, so it would have been largely too late to make any major changes had any issues been found. Let's look at a few of these changes. These are definitely not all of them, and most of these are pretty trivial. We will not be looking at things like differences in dining options, such as the new theming in the supper club, the different names of the venues, or the various smaller art pieces found inside the ship. Number 1. The additional whirlpool. As stated previously, this whirlpool was on the original design for Icon, but it was taken out due to fears of it exceeding the allowable water weight limit. During Icon's sea trials, it was found that there was more margin than previously thought, and so the whirlpool was reintroduced on Star. Number 2. More sun loungers. On the port side of Chill Island on Deck 15, overlooking Central Park, is a small area open to the elements. On Icon, this area was filled with funky and colorful lounging furniture and swings. On Star, none of that appears, and in its place are additional sun loungers, as well as a different color palette on the deck below. Number 3. The central funnel superstructure sculpture. On Icon, this was more or less a last-minute addition, as was most of the exterior artwork, as it never appeared in any of the public renderings. It mimics a starburst of color. Within the center is a 3D sculpture that complements the artwork. On Star, the artwork is vastly different, and in the middle, fittingly enough, is a star. Number 4. The Crown and Anchor logos. Icon's Crown and Anchor logo on the aft arch did not have any lighting features. On Star, the entire outline lights up. Additionally, the 2 large logos on Icon only had lights around the outline. Star's logo has both outline lights as well as lights in the entire center of the logo itself, allowing it to be fully lit up at night. Number 18. It's not a change, but it should be noted that the specialty restaurant in Surfside, Pier 7, does remain. Despite there being no true confirmation that something else would take its place, it was commonly thought that some other venue would be taking its place on Star. These are definitely not all of the changes, but they are the ones that more or less stand out above the rest. Now, are Icon and Star exactly identical? No. But, are they virtually identical? Yes. And now, if you memorize some of these small differences in design and finish, you will now be the smartest one at the dining table when cruising on Icon or Star. The first 2 ships were now running cruises together, yet, unsurprisingly, the demand continued to stay high. Royal Caribbean was fairly confident that this would be the case early on. That is partially why, since mid-2019, additional running mates have been added to the Icon-class roster at a quick rate. The next sister in the lineup will be known as Legend of the Seas. Because of the difference of time between Icon's first voyages and when construction really began to take hold, a number of more substantial changes were able to be considered and incorporated into the design. Though the changes aren't considerably momentous, as the Icon class is already pushing the boundaries in what's currently possible in cruise ship design, There are some noteworthy differences, such as the additions of new dining venues, an expanded casino, a new mini golf course design, and a fresh look of the Category 6 Waterpark. She will be the first Royal Caribbean vessel to reuse an older name, with Legend of the Seas first being used by the first member of the Vision class in 1995. She is due to make her debut in the Mediterranean on July 4th, 2026. By August 2024, it became clear that 3 sisters wasn't going to be sufficient. On August 27th, an order for a 4th member was placed with Meyer Turku. This order is an important milestone for the future of Finnish shipbuilding and the maritime industry. Icon of the Seas is a joint achievement of the shipyard and all partners, which has raised shipbuilding, energy efficiency, and customer experience to a whole new level. The now confirmed order is yet another recognition of the professionalism of our personnel and our leadership in maritime innovation. In addition to the 4th vessel order, were options for 2 additional sisters. It should be noted that the official date of the start of construction of new build 1403 with the steel cutting ceremony is not publicly known, as the milestone was not released by either the shipyard or Royal Caribbean. She is currently in the assembly phase of construction in the dry dock. Her name, home port, and itineraries have yet to be announced, but are expected to be released in the coming weeks of this video being published. Roughly 13 months after the official ordering of Icon 4, there came news of something not really seen in modern shipbuilding. It was the announcement that Meyer Turku had signed an agreement with Royal Caribbean Group that allows exclusive rights to the shipyard and the building of their vessels through 2036. Additionally, the 5th Icon vessel order was confirmed, but Icon 6 remained an option. A 7th Icon vessel was added to the option group. With the agreements now signed, we are announcing our joint plan to build more ships and advance shipbuilding in collaboration with Royal Caribbean and our key partners over the next 10 years. I am extremely proud of the recognition that Meyer Turku's professional staff and Finnish maritime industry expertise are receiving with these orders. Construction of Icon 5, now known as New Build 1408, commenced on January 19, 2026, and she is due to enter service in 2028. As it stands at the present date, the Icon class is made up as follows. Icon and Star of the Seas are currently in service. Legend of the Seas is in the final stages of fitting out and is due to enter service in July 2026. Icon 4 is in the early assembly phase and due to enter service sometime in 2027. Icon 5 is in the early stages of initial construction and is expected to be delivered in 2028. Icon 6 and Icon 7 remain optional orders, and it is likely that they will be confirmed in the future. To think that it is possible that by 2030 there will be 7 Icon-class vessels operating around the world is hard to comprehend, especially considering that at least through Icon 5, one has and will be delivered every year. The demand for these ships are sky high, and having 7 of these ships will help in fulfilling that need. Together with the Oasis class, especially the newer ones, Royal Caribbean's primary fleet has and will continue to redefine the mainstream cruise industry. Despite only being out for roughly 2 years, the Icon ships have already caused a knee-jerk reaction within the rivaling mainstream cruise lines to try and capture some of that magic, and they are mainly doing this by ordering their first ships that will exceed 200,000 tons. This includes Carnival Cruise Line's Project Ace, which will consist of at least 3 230,000-ton vessels. Norwegian Cruise Line's Project New Era will be made up of at least 5 vessels with a tonnage of around 227,000 tons. MSC has massively expanded their current world-class lineup. This was the first class to really challenge the Oasis ships, and were the first non-Royal Caribbean ships to exceed 200,000 tons. At the present time, there are 2 in service, 2 under construction, and 4 more on order. Additionally, a new unconfirmed class is rumored to be under development by MSC that will surpass the Icon class in size and offerings. They are rumored to be roughly 270,000 tons in displacement. These are some of the main highlights of what is to come in the mainstream cruise market within the next 10 years. And virtually all of these orders stem directly from the major success of both the Oasis and especially the Icon class ships. It is no longer possible to ignore or dismiss the success these vessels have had. It is going to be an exciting time in the industry throughout the next decade. As of the making of this video, Star of the Seas is continuing to sail for Royal Caribbean International. As scheduled, she will continue to run the same 7-night cruises she started performing since her maiden voyage, through at least April 2028. Royal Caribbean International was born into an industry that was relatively young, ambitious, but also unforgiving. Offering something against the curve was paramount to not only survive, but to thrive. Right off the bat, they began by offering something bold but relatively risky: 3 pioneering purpose-built warmer market cruise ships that would stand out against a market that was largely made up of converted second-hand ocean liners. As time went on, their ambitions only continued to grow, resulting in a fleet made up of some of the most innovative and groundbreaking vessels ever to exist. When looking back in time at what cruise ships changed, redefined, or grew the industry, a lot of those vessels belong to Royal Caribbean. Vessels like Sovereign, Voyager, Oasis, Freedom, Quantum, and Utopia have helped redefine the cruise ship and contributed so much to the industry we all know and enjoy today. In 2016, they began work on their boldest lineup yet. Even though they were not intended to be the largest, they wanted them to be the greatest. And as a result of the creative design process that had produced their innovative family tree, something truly iconic and unforgettable was made. The Icon class changed everything for the mainstream cruise market, and it showed in their popularity alone. The expectations were set extremely high, and in the end, they were oftentimes exceeded. Star of the Seas is a continuation of not only the momentum that started with her older sister, but also the expectations set by her predecessors. It is likely that she will not be as well remembered as Icon in the end, but she has already accomplished a great deal, and will, without a shadow of a doubt, continue to carry the torch forward into an exciting future, and will give her passengers both a cruise and a vacation unlike any other.